Thanks for staying with us on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Equality Connecticut is the first statewide political organization focusing on LGBTQIA residents. Matt Blinstrubas is the executive director leading this social justice group, and he's joining us now this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Connecticut has really been at the forefront in years past of passing a lot of LGBTQ plus protections and legislation, but we've kind of seen that conversation shift nationally. So states are picking apart even national protections, courts are going back on decisions, you know, the national conversation is really shifting. So why do you think there needs to be a statewide advocacy group here in Connecticut?
Thanks for the question. Firstly, I would just say that we're actually not the first. We're an iteration of several decades of movement building and advocacy and impact by the LGBT community making change at the Capitol.
Fantastic.
And including, the effort for the campaign for marriage equality and the expansion of non-discrimination to protect gender identity and expression. So we consider ourselves an iteration of...
So kind of the next step in a line of multiple groups?
Exactly,
okay.
Exactly. And so I think when we started forming Equality Connecticut, though, one of our guiding principles was that the needs of the LGBT community change over time. The experience of being an LGBTQ person changes over time and evolves. And so no matter what, in Connecticut, there will always be a need to have an organization that it has a presence at the Capitol that mobilizes people in communities around the country around the state, that hears, that listens to the needs of what the challenges people are facing, and also celebrates the history and culture of LGBTQ people in Connecticut. And so we believe in that sense of permanence. No matter what is going on, we always need to be ready and mobilized.
And you were saying Equality Connecticut sort of the next step and has come out of iterations of other different groups. How is it different, though, and how long have you been around for?
So we, starting at the end of 2018, a group of folks who were really instrumental in passing the ban on conversion therapy in 2017 engaged in a series of town hall meetings and listening sessions, and we're really pondering whether to that effort should continue, that mobilization effort. And we did the work of forming a board, building a mission. We worked very slowly and intentionally. Of course, there was a pandemic in there, and so that affected our momentum. And but in 2021, we came back together, asking ourselves, should we do this? And so we did. And so we've been really building the nuts and bolts of a nonprofit, building a network of activists.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there are just 5 weeks left now in this year's legislative session. And what proposals have you had your eyes on so far? What were you hoping is prioritized, or maybe still hoping will eventually be prioritized this session?
Well, I think I'm really happy that an act concerning equity in fertility access was just voted out of the Appropriations Committee, and it's headed to the House, and we hope that it will pass. And that bill ensures that LGBTQ people and single people have access to fertility care. And so that is certainly, we're part of a coalition of organizations that's been supporting that, and it's really exciting. And we have a number of other bills that we're looking at, and also thinking much more long-term as we build our capacity and go around the state listening to folks and what they might need.
Gotcha. And in those conversations, what have you heard? And I know you said earlier a group being there always to sort of listen as those concerns change. What have you heard this year's priorities from your advocates?
Well, one thing I think is clear is that we're joining an ecosystem of vibrant LGBTQ organizations that provide services, that have safe space, that provide access to HIV treatment and prevention tools, that work to better the the lives of LGBT people in every corner. And so those organizations have needs, whether it's fundraising or whether it's advocating and coordinating different policy initiatives. So we're certainly looking to our friends and colleagues at other LGBT organizations to hear what they might need.
And is there anything you feel lawmakers missed this session? Were there any proposals you were hoping to see or anything you hope will be brought up soon in these next 5 weeks?
I mean, that's a really good question. We're still building our own capacity, and we're in listening mode at the moment. We hope to have a policy agenda all our own next year. I think that one issue that we're hearing about and having a lot of conversations about would certainly be the families with transgender children who are coming to Connecticut in the face of what's happening around the country, either to move or receive services and go back home. And so we're trying to understand that and see what policy opportunities are.
There's been a lot of talk about gender-affirming healthcare, as you said, in lots of other states, and a lot of debate in mostly other states than Connecticut, but those conversations still seep in close to home. Do those debates elsewhere still impact queer people in our state?
Certainly. I mean, it's definitely a very perilous time for the LGBTQ movement and LGBTQ people around the country. I think I saw 400 plus anti-LGBT bills introduced this year in state legislatures in 10 states and counting, barring access to gender-affirming care for young people. And so I think people in Connecticut see that and are concerned that it could happen in Connecticut, and then are also wanting to take action and get involved to stop it from happening outside Connecticut. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely, it affects us all. It's on all our minds, for sure.
And you said you've been hearing, has that been common, hearing about families who are considering or have moved here into Connecticut because of protections this state has in place versus others? There
are definitely families moving, and we're trying to understand what their needs are. I know there's already some policy conversations happening, which we're really heartened by. And we're trying to see how we can grow and expand that and connect to those families.
Right. So, excuse me, another topic which has been happening in other states, but it can go from nationally to locally very quickly, is book bans. And we have seen some instances of that here in Connecticut towns, and a lot of those books have had to do with the LGBTQ community. Specifically, one of the first ones we saw an issue with a RuPaul book, which includes drag queens. And another library here in Connecticut, though, is kind of taking the other angle and making itself a sanctuary with including lots of banned books purposely available, for people to read. Where do you think this book battle ends, and do you think there's anything missing from these conversations?
I think one thing to take away from it is that LGBTQ people and our allies are really attentive and mobilizing to respond to these things. And I think from Equality Connecticut's perspective, we're trying to connect to people in towns around the state who are involved in standing up to that. I think it speaks to the fact that there's no shortage of interest and engagement in our communities on these issues. And so I think we have to remain vigilant. Whether there's a statewide policy solution, I think is something we're certainly interested in exploring, but for now, it's been really wonderful to see people and the response of people in communities around the state to stand up and stop that.
Sure. And we've seen, as I said, some of these books dealing with LGBTQ ideas and themes. Why do you think it's important to have these books still accessible to people, and specifically youth, because a lot of this is happening in libraries and schools?
I mean, it's a matter of it's free speech, first and foremost, and understanding that, this is not a country or state that bans books. And I think that is something like even the fact that it's 2023 and we're saying that that's an issue that we're thinking about, censorship, that doesn't really sound right. And I think that the way that we hear, like the way we learn about experiences that are not our own is through stories. And so we need access to, I mean, it's an access to stories question. And so that's, I think, what we need to ensure, especially that young people have access to stories and experiences that may not be like their own, so to develop, and that's where empathy comes from.
Right. So we've been talking about national, state issues and what lawmakers can do, but what can everyday people and residents in Connecticut do if they want to actively support Connecticut's queer people here in Connecticut?
So our founding principle is building power by facilitating joy. And we believe that when LGBTQ people come together and when our friends and neighbors support the LGBT community, that is an inherently joyous experience. And it's by tapping into that joy of being together and supporting one another and seeing each other that we realize our collective political power. And so I think, you know, in addition to going on our website and signing up for our list and giving us suggestions for policy areas that we need to be paying attention to, this is everybody's group. I think just being kind to your neighbor and coming together in a sense under an umbrella of joy is where political power comes from.
So you mentioned that you're hoping for next year, for next session, to kind of have priority outline and a list of priorities. But what else is next? What's in the future for Equality Connecticut?
So Pride Month is coming up.
Just around the corner.
You know, one thing that's really changed in Connecticut is that there are now Pride events on almost every town green, whereas it was in just a few cities. And so we'll be at various Pride events. We have a couple of town halls where we're going to be talking and listening and things like that. And then, you know, whether it's the families with trans kids who are coming to Connecticut, we're creating a few coalitions and working groups that where some of those conversations can develop into potential bills and policy solutions.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for being with us here again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well,